If you've played Menace for more than 5 minutes, you know all too well how the game loves to punish any small tactical error. You go into a mission thinking you've put together the perfect strategy, and out of nowhere, your entire squad turns to dust. I've lost count of how many times my team was crushed at the start, and let's be honest, no one has the patience to keep repeating easy battles just to slowly grind for experience. That's why today I'm going to show you 10 advanced tips to break the difficulty curve and make your team incredibly strong very fast, skipping that boring grind part entirely. Get your gear ready, and let's head straight to the first tip. There's a classic moment almost every new player goes through. You position a soldier well, aim at an enemy vehicle, spend precious ammo, and the shot simply ricochets. You stare at the screen, not understanding what went wrong, because your aim was right, your position seemed good, and yet it caused 0 damage. The answer to this mystery isn't in your weapon or your unit, it's in the angle of the attack, and understanding this completely changes how you deal with vehicles on the battlefield. Directional armor means that each vehicle has different protection points depending on where you attack. The front is always the most heavily armored side, designed to absorb the bulk of frontal combat. The flanks are considerably weaker, and the rear is where the real damage happens. So when you attack a vehicle from the front and the shot ricochets, the game isn't being unfair to you, it's being realistic, and the solution is never to shoot more times at the same spot. It's to change the angle. The tactical application of this requires you to think about maneuvering before you think about firing. Before attacking an enemy vehicle, you want at least one unit positioned on the flank or behind it. This might mean spending an entire turn just moving without shooting, which seems like a waste, but it isn't. A turn of repositioning that guarantees maximum damage is infinitely better than 3 turns shooting from the front and causing 0. In Menace, the geometry of the battlefield is a weapon just as much as any rifle, and this works both ways, which is equally important. Your own vehicles also have directional armor, so never leave the flank or rear of your APC exposed to enemy units that know what they're doing. Position your vehicles with the front facing the direction of the greatest threat, use environmental obstacles to protect the sides, and ensure the enemy will have to hit the thickest part of the armor. Angle control is combat control, and those who understand this in Menace have a huge advantage over those who are still shooting head-on and hoping for the best. The suppression mechanic in this game is divided into 3 stages: no effect, suppressed, and completely pinned. When an enemy reaches the suppressed stage, they lose 30 action points and suffer a 35% accuracy penalty. In the pin stage, they become completely immobilized, hit the ground, and are practically out of the game for that turn, and sometimes the next one too. So think with me. Why spend all your resources trying to kill a well-positioned enemy with good armor when you can simply lock them in place and use that time to flank? Your machine guns and high-volume fire weapons are made exactly for this. While one squad keeps the enemy suppressed, the other advances from the side. A suppressed unit is crouched or prone, which might make it seem harder to hit, but you've already gained what you needed. Field control. It won't move, it won't shoot straight, and it won't cause havoc. And that is worth gold in battles where a positioning error kills you in seconds. If you keep constant pressure, the unit might simply flee the battlefield. Its icon starts flashing white as a warning signal, and it tries to escape. The result? You removed a threat without spending a bullet on it. In Menace, suppressing isn't a passive strategy, it's tactical dominance. Learn the difference between what needs to die now and what just needs to stop bothering you, and you'll start winning battles that previously seemed impossible. You know that feeling of jumping into a new tactical game and just sending your soldiers on foot across open ground, only to watch half the squad die before they even get into position? Well, Menace is going to punish you hard for that. But there's a secret that will completely change your approach from the very first missions, and it's right in front of you since the start of the game. Your APC, the armored transport that many people ignore. The starting APC is absurdly strong for an asset the game hands you right away. It's not just for moving troops from point A to point B, it's literally an armored shield on wheels. When you're crossing open terrain without cover, instead of sending your soldiers running and praying they don't become targets, you put them inside the vehicle and advance safely. The difference in survival is brutal, especially on maps where the enemy is already positioned and waiting for you to make exactly that mistake. And when you reach the combat zone, don't abandon the APC in a corner. Position it strategically on the field as mobile cover. Your soldiers can use the vehicle's hull as a support point, shoot from the side, and still have the option to jump back in quickly if the situation gets tight. This gives you a flexibility that no fixed object in the environment can offer, because you can reposition as the combat evolves instead of getting stuck on a flank the enemy has already figured out. The biggest mistake I used to make was treating the APC like a taxi and parking it far from the action after unloading the troops. Don't do that. Keep it in the game, on the front line, absorbing damage that your fragile soldiers would never survive. In Menace, every resource the game gives you has a real tactical purpose, and the APC is perhaps the best example of this. Learning to use it right from the start is what will separate your first victories from a frustrated restart of the same mission for the 5th time. Let me tell you something I learned the hard way in Menace. Reaching the middle of a mission with standard carbines and realizing your soldiers are just scratching the enemy's armor while they dismantle you in 2 turns. It's frustrating, it's humiliating, and worst of all, it's completely avoidable. The power gap between starting gear and what you can buy early on the black market is massive, and the sooner you understand this, the better. Crowbar rifles and K-Packs are exactly the upgrade your squad needs right at the beginning. The starting carbines work for the first missions, but as enemies get tougher and more aggressive, they start to feel like you're throwing pebbles. The crowbars completely change this scenario, with visibly superior damage that makes a real difference in the number of actions you need to spend to eliminate or suppress a target. Every turn counts in Menace, and a better weapon means fewer turns exposed to enemy fire. The practical tip here is, as soon as the black market becomes available, this should be your first purchasing priority, before thinking about any other upgrade. Don't fall into the trap of saving resources, waiting for something better to appear later, because the jump in efficiency these rifles give you justifies the immediate investment. You'll feel in the first mission using them how much you were fighting at a disadvantage before, and that will change the way you think about resource management in the game. And there's another important detail. Well arming your core units, the ones on the front line doing the heavy lifting, multiplies the value of everything you've already learned about suppression and positioning. It's no use having the best tactics in the world if your weapon doesn't deliver the damage needed to execute the plan. In Menace, equipment isn't a secondary detail, it's part of the strategy. Get the crowbars early, equip them on the right units, and you'll start feeling like you're in control of the battlefield instead of just surviving it. You're in the middle of a tense mission, your squad leader just went down in the open, and there are 4 well-positioned enemies looking straight at him. Any soldier you send to rescue him will become a target the moment they take a step. It seems like there's no way out, right? Wrong. This is exactly the situation where the smoke grenade turns a certain defeat into a game changer, and many people never learn to use this tool correctly because they underestimate how much visibility changes everything in Menace. The mechanic is simple, but the impact is profound. Smoke creates a zone that completely blocks the enemy's line of sight. If the enemy can't see you, they can't shoot you. This means you can cross open ground, rescue a fallen unit, or simply reposition your squad without taking a hail of gunfire in the process. In a game where exposure to enemy fire can end a soldier in 1 or 2 turns, having a free turn of movement without being attacked is incredibly valuable. The most important use, which will save your hardest missions, is precisely rescuing squad leaders. Leaders are scarce and precious resources in Menace, and losing them has consequences that go beyond that single mission. So when a leader falls in the open, the first thing you do is check if you have a smoke grenade available. Throw the smoke between the enemy and the fallen leader, advance with a unit, perform the rescue, and retreat. Simple, efficient, and it avoids a huge headache later on. Smoke doesn't kill anyone, it doesn't cause damage, and that's why many people ignore it in their inventory. But it does something no weapon can. It gives you control over what the enemy can and cannot do. Carry smoke on at least 1 unit in your squad for every mission, because the turn you need it and don't have it will be exactly the turn that costs you the mission. There's a mistake I almost always made in the first hours of the game, and it doesn't happen on the battlefield, it happens on the management screen even before the mission starts. You find a squad leader who works well, has the right attributes, and you already know how to use them, so you send them on every subsequent mission because it's working. Seems logical, right? But Menace punishes you for exactly that, and the name of that punishment is the Exhausted debuff. When a leader is used in consecutive missions without rest, they accumulate fatigue and become exhausted, which directly reduces their action points. And in a game where every action point is precious, having your main leader operating below their maximum potential is the kind of silent disadvantage you only notice when the mission is too difficult and you don't understand why. It's not that the map got harder or your tactics are wrong, it's your leader operating at the limit because you didn't let them rest. The solution is simple and well worth investing in early. Have at least 1 or 2 extra leaders in reserve and rotate them from mission to mission. It doesn't have to be the most powerful leader all the time, it needs to be a rested leader with full action points. Sometimes a mediocre leader operating at 100% will outperform an excellent leader running at 70%. And Menace is exactly the kind of game where that small margin decides if you finish the mission in the clear or lose soldiers you didn't need to lose. Think of your leaders like high-performance athletes. No team puts the same player on the field nonstop and expects maximum performance every time. The bench exists for a reason. So when you go to recruit at the start of the game, don't skimp on extra leaders thinking you'll only use one. Diversify, train more than one profile, and keep the rotation active. This management discipline outside the battlefield is what will make the difference when the missions get heavier and you need everyone operating at their peak. If there's one thing Menace knows how to do well, it's throwing you into a situation where you're surrounded, low on ammo, and a horde of melee aliens is closing in from all sides at once. It's exactly in this moment of desperation that most players start shooting in a panic, wasting precious ammo on targets that barely die with one shot, and then the mission starts to crumble. But what if I told you the answer to this situation has 4 wheels and a floored accelerator? The roadkill ability of vehicles was made exactly for this scenario. When you have a horde of bugs or alien swarms advancing in tight formation, running them over causes immediate casualties in the group and generates large-scale suppression on the survivors. This means that in a single move, you eliminate part of the horde and lock the rest in place without spending a single bullet. In missions where your ammo needs to last until the end, this kind of trade is simply irresistible. The tactical secret here is positioning before activating the ability. You want the vehicle to enter the roadkill route with as many enemies as possible in the line of movement. So don't just run things over in any direction. Wait for the horde to group up, plan the trajectory that will cover the most targets, and then execute. A well-positioned roadkill can clear a threat that would take 4 or 5 turns of normal combat to resolve, and still leaves you with ammo to deal with whatever comes next. And there's a detail that makes this even more valuable. Bugs and melee creatures are exactly the type of enemy that doesn't respond well to conventional suppression, because their goal is to get to you regardless of the cost. Trying to suppress a horde with normal weapons is a battle of attrition that will rarely favor you. Running them over cuts that cycle in a brutal and direct way. So whenever you see that mass of aliens moving toward you, don't think of bullets, think of the gas pedal. Menace is the kind of game that tests you not just in combat, but in your ability to make tough decisions under pressure. And one of the hardest decisions, especially at the beginning, is looking at that tempting secondary objective on the screen, the one that asks you to complete the mission in X turns or eliminate a specific target with absurd restrictions. And having the tactical maturity to say, not now. It feels like you're leaving rewards on the table, but in reality, you're protecting something much more valuable. Permanent losses in Menace have real weight. Unlike many tactics games where a soldier's death is just an inconvenience, here you feel the impact in subsequent missions, in the resources you won't have, and in the options that close because your squad is shorthanded. So when a secondary objective requires you to expose yourself unnecessarily in the early operations, the risk simply isn't worth it. Securing the main victory with your squad intact is worth much more than any bonus that secondary mission offers. The right mindset for this initial phase is simple. You're building a solid foundation, not trying to beat the game in the first week. The basic resources guaranteed by the main victory are exactly what you need to upgrade equipment, recruit new leaders, and reach advanced missions in a position to actually compete for secondary objectives. Trying to run before you can walk in Menace is the perfect recipe for reaching the mid-game broke and out of options. And when you come back to these secondary objectives later with a better equipped squad, rested leaders, and a better reading of the game mechanics, they will seem much more manageable. What seemed impossible with starting carbines and poorly positioned troops becomes a reasonable challenge when you have crowbar rifles, smoke in your inventory, and know how to use suppression. Patience in Menace isn't weakness, it's strategy. Play the long game from the start, and the game will get progressively more generous with you. Menace on higher difficulties has a very particular way of teaching you respect, and that lesson usually arrives at the worst possible moment. You're in the final stretch of a long mission, there are still enemies on the field, and suddenly you realize half your squad is out of ammo. It wasn't a tactical error or bad positioning. It was that series of long-range shots you kept trying throughout the mission, each with a very low hit chance. Each wasting magazines you're going to miss now. Ammo in Menace isn't infinite, and the game doesn't warn you in an obvious way when you're hitting the limit. You need to develop the habit of actively monitoring this during the mission, especially when it's long or when enemies are in difficult positions. Extra magazines aren't an optional inventory item. They are a tactical life insurance policy. Bringing ammo backup might feel like it's taking up space that could be used for grenades or offensive gear, but finishing a mission with bullets is much more valuable than any item you swapped for them. The behavior that wastes the most ammo in Menace is the long-range lucky shot. You know, when you see an enemy at the edge of your range, the hit chance is 20 or 30%, but you try anyway because it might hit, it rarely hits, and when it does, it doesn't cause enough damage to justify the expense. Every shot lost in this situation is one less shot for a time when you'll need certainty, not luck. Distance without a favorable angle isn't an opportunity, it's a trap. Ammo discipline changes completely when you start treating every shot as a limited resource rather than a free action. You start moving more before shooting, waiting for the right angle, using suppression more judiciously, and paradoxically, you become more lethal because every shot has a better chance of actually mattering. On high difficulties, Menace rewards those who think before pulling the trigger and mercilessly punishes those who shoot on reflex. Take the extra magazines, respect the distance, and leave luck to those who don't have a strategy. The first turn of a mission can set the tone for everything that follows. If you can neutralize a high priority target before it takes a single action, you don't just eliminate a threat, you unbalance the entire enemy formation before it has a chance to react. This is exactly why the Vanguard perk exists, and when you understand its potential combined with the right units, you start clearing maps at a speed that feels unfair. Vanguard works as a high initiative trigger, allowing your unit to act sooner than expected and neutralize high-value targets right out of the gate. And when you put this in the hands of a precise shooter like Darby or an agile scout, the combination becomes absurdly efficient. These unit profiles already naturally have high vision range, good accuracy, and mobility, and Vanguard enhances exactly these qualities, turning the first turn into a surgical execution rather than a cautious positioning move. The practical application is simpler than it seems. Before any mission, identify which enemy will cause the most trouble if left free to act. It could be an enemy leader, a heavy unit, or a sniper positioned in high cover. That is the Vanguard target. You position your scout or Darby with a favorable line of sight, activate the perk on the first turn, and eliminate or suppress that target before they even think about acting. The rest of the mission becomes easier because the most threatening piece on the opponent's board was removed immediately, and the ripple effect of this is huge. When you eliminate a priority target on the first turn, the remaining enemies often react more passively, regrouping or staying on the defensive, which gives you control over the pace of combat from the very beginning. This means less damage taken, less ammo spent, and less risk of losing soldiers. Vanguard isn't just an offensive perk, it's a mission control tool disguised as an attack. Put it on the right units. Plan the first turn as if it were the most important, because most of the time, that's exactly what it will be.
Sometimes I ask where the stars have gone. Are they hiding from